Welcome to the Podkey summary of Concorde. Concorde was one of those machines that felt like the future had briefly landed ahead of schedule. It solved some brutally hard engineering problems, flew astonishingly fast, and became a design icon, while also turning into a textbook case of how a technological triumph can make very shaky business sense. Its story sits right where ambition, politics, prestige, environmental limits, and safety all bump into each other. The first thing to appreciate is that supersonic flight creates a nasty design trade-off. An airplane built to cruise efficiently faster than sound usually wants wings that are terrible at low speed, which is not ideal when you also need to take off and land without terrifying everybody involved. Concorde's answer was that beautiful slender delta wing, and eventually the refined ogival shape, which created strong vortices at high angles of attack. In plain language, those swirling flows helped the wing keep producing lift during takeoff and landing, even though the airplane was still working with the usual low-speed disadvantages of a supersonic design. It still needed unusually high landing and rotation angles, which is why Concorde had that famous droop nose, so pilots could actually see the runway. And instead of trimming the aircraft with draggy control surfaces, it moved fuel around the airplane to shift the center of gravity during acceleration and deceleration. That sounds a little absurd the first time you hear it, but it was a very elegant way to manage a very demanding aircraft. Concorde also packed in a bunch of technology that was way ahead of its era: analog fly-by-wire controls, digital engine intake control, variable intake ramps, full regime autothrottle, supercruise, and even using fuel to help cool parts of the airframe and hydraulic systems. The economics, though, were never as sleek as the airplane. Concorde started as an Anglo-French partnership, locked in by a 1962 treaty that made cancellation expensive enough to really hurt. That mattered because the project kept looking weaker financially while becoming harder politically to walk away from. Britain wanted closer European integration, and both governments worried that if supersonic transport really was the next big thing, bailing out would mean giving up industrial influence and handing prestige to somebody else. So this became one of those classic mega-project situations where leaders more or less accepted that direct financial returns were unlikely, but kept going, because the strategic and symbolic stakes felt bigger than the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet, for the record, got ugly fast. Development cost estimates rose from about £70 million at the start to roughly £1.5 to £2.1 billion by 1976, more than 6 times the early projection. By then, the whole idea of building the program at a scale that could spread those costs around had basically collapsed, and only 20 aircraft were ever constructed. As a service, Concorde did something no ordinary airliner could touch. It cut transatlantic travel time by more than half, getting from London or Paris to New York in just under 3.5 hours. That is still kind of jaw-dropping. But the catch was that its economics only worked for a tiny slice of travelers. This was never mass transportation. It depended on premium fares, heavy aircraft utilization, and a small wealthy market willing to pay for time saved and status displayed. On efficiency, it was in another league, and not in the good sense. Concorde delivered about 15.8 passenger miles per gallon, compared with 33.3 for the Boeing 707, 46.4 for the 747, and 53.6 for the DC-10. Then the 1973 oil crisis hit, cheap air travel expanded, and wide-body jets kept getting more efficient. That combination badly weakened the case for a supersonic airliner that burned a lot of fuel and carried relatively few people. More than 100 options were initially placed by major airlines, which sounds impressive until you get to the ending. Only Air France and British Airways actually accepted deliveries, 7 each. British Airways later managed to reposition Concorde as a super premium service and made its own operation profitable. But that didn't rescue the broader commercial logic of the project. Even if the economics had been friendlier, Concorde ran into a limit that money couldn't smooth over. Sonic booms made routine supersonic flight over populated land a non-starter, so the aircraft's natural market was largely confined to transoceanic routes. That chopped out a huge number of possible services right from the start. Noise concerns also brought bans or restrictions in places including the United States, India, and Malaysia. And Concorde became much bigger than itself in public debate. People argued not only about airport noise, but also about nitrogen oxide emissions, high in the stratosphere, and the possibility that a future fleet of 500 similar aircraft could reduce global ozone by around 2%. What's interesting is that the controversy helped shape policy beyond this one airplane. It fed into stricter aircraft noise regulation and into a broader habit of weighing environmental and social costs alongside technological ambition. Some later noise abatement practices, even things like acoustic fencing around high-speed rail, benefited from lessons first sharpened in the supersonic transport debate. For most of its career, Concorde had an extraordinary safety reputation. Before 2000, it had recorded 0 passenger deaths and was arguably the safest operational passenger airliner. At the same time, there was a warning sign underneath that record. Between 1995 and 2000, its rate of tire damage was 30 times higher than that of subsonic aircraft. Then came Air France Flight 4590 on July 25, 2000. All 109 people on board were killed, along with 4 people on the ground, in Concorde's only fatal accident. The official investigation said, a tire struck metal debris left by a departing DC-10. The tire burst, tank damage followed, fuel ignited, and the aircraft was lost. That explanation has never been universally accepted. Former British Airways Concorde captain Mike Bannister and other British investigators argued that the disaster was really an accident chain involving maintenance and operational issues, including a missing landing gear spacer, misalignment, excess takeoff weight, and the premature shutdown of an engine. After the crash, the fleet was grounded temporarily and then modified with Kevlar fuel tank liners, improved electrical controls, and burst-resistant tires. The strange thing about Concorde is that its success was never mainly about scale. It became successful as an idea, as an image, as a kind of flying shorthand for glamour, confidence, and technical daring. Heads of state, royalty, celebrities, and wealthy travelers used it, and occasional charter flights gave enthusiasts a rare chance to sample supersonic travel without needing a palace or a movie contract. Its performance stayed remarkable right to the end of its era. A British Airways Concorde flew from New York to London in 2 hours 52 minutes, 59 seconds in 1996, and chartered flights set around the world, passenger records of 31 hours 27 minutes, 49 seconds eastbound, and 32 hours 49 minutes 3 seconds westbound. Commercially, it failed in the broad sense. Culturally, technologically, and as pure industrial design, it absolutely did not. In a 2006 BBC and Design Museum vote, Concorde was chosen as Britain's favorite design, ahead of the Mini, the Tube Map, the Spitfire, the Jaguar E-Type, and even the World Wide Web. That says a lot about how people remember it. Not as the plane that made the most business sense, but as the one that made the boldest promise. Concorde's legacy is basically a reminder that progress isn't one simple line upward. Sometimes the future arrives looking flawless, and then immediately starts arguing with physics, economics, politics, and the atmosphere. And still, every time you see one, it's hard not to think, yeah, that was special. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.